The days after the party were filled with an uneasy quietness in the Johnson household. Precious kept herself busy in the kitchen, avoiding both Maurice and Kelvin as much as possible. But their warnings and conversations lingered in her mind. Maurice's cryptic words about the family hiding something gnawed at her, making her second-guess everything she thought she knew about them. That evening, while she was cleaning up after dinner, Mrs. Johnson walked into the kitchen. Her warm smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Precious, dear, you've been such a blessing to this house," she said, her tone soft. "But I hope you understand that we're a family with boundaries." Precious froze for a moment, then turned to face her. "Of course, ma'am. I've tried to stay professional." Mrs. Johnson's smile widened, but there was an edge to it. "Good. It's important to know one's place, especially in a family as unique as ours." The words felt like a warning. Precious nodded politely, but as Mrs. Johnson left, her heart raced. What was happening in this house? And why did everyone seem so guarded? Later that night, Precious couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, replaying Mrs. Johnson's words in her mind. Eventually, she decided to take a walk around the house to clear her head. The mansion was quiet, the only sounds coming from the faint chirping of crickets outside. As she wandered through the halls, she heard muffled voices coming from Mr. Johnson's study. She hesitated, then stepped closer, pressing her ear against the door. "You know this can't continue," Mr. Johnson's voice said, low and firm. "It's not my fault things turned out this way," Maurice replied, his tone defensive. "You and Kelvin need to resolve this before it ruins everything," Mr. Johnson continued. "This family has worked too hard to let secrets tear us apart." Precious felt a chill run down her spine. What were they talking about? She leaned in closer, but the conversation ended abruptly, and she barely had time to retreat before the door opened. Maurice stepped out, his face set in a scowl. He froze when he saw her. "Precious," he said, his voice low. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't sleep," she stammered, her heart pounding. He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "You shouldn't be wandering around the house at night. Go back to your room." Without waiting for a response, he walked past her, his shoulders tense. Precious hurried back to her room, her mind racing. The family was definitely hiding something, and it seemed to be tearing them apart. The next morning, Kelvin found her in the garden. He looked troubled, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "Precious, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "But you have to promise not to tell anyone." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. There's a reason Maurice and I don't get along," he began. "It's not just about you, though you've made things more complicated." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He looked away, as if searching for the right words. "Maurice has always been the golden child, the one everyone expects to take over the family business. But he's not who he pretends to be. He's made mistakes, big ones, and now he's trying to cover them up. My father knows, but he's too afraid of the fallout to do anything." Precious felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. "What kind of mistakes?" Kelvin shook his head. "I can't tell you everything, but let's just say Maurice isn't the person you think he is. And if you get too close to him, you'll be dragged into his mess." Before she could respond, Maurice appeared in the doorway. His expression darkened when he saw them together. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his tone sharp. Kelvin stood up, his jaw tightening. "We were just talking." Maurice smirked, but his eyes were cold. "Of course you were." Precious felt trapped between the two brothers, their rivalry growing more intense by the day. But as the weeks went on, she realized that the conflict between them wasn't just about her, it was about power, secrets, and a past neither of them wanted to face. One night, while Precious was cleaning up in the study, she found another letter tucked inside a drawer. This one was addressed to Mr. Johnson and dated several years ago. It spoke of a financial scandal involving Maurice and a deal that had gone terribly wrong. The letter hinted that the family had covered it up to protect their reputation, but the consequences were far from over. Precious's hands trembled as she read the letter. If what it said was true, then Maurice's charm and confidence were nothing more than a facade. And Kelvin's warnings suddenly made sense. The next morning, Maurice confronted her. "I know you've been snooping around," he said, his tone icy. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of things that don't concern you, Precious. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." But it was too late. Precious was already in too deep, and she knew that whatever secrets the Johnson family was hiding, they were about to come to light. The tension in the Johnson household was almost suffocating. Precious couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she entered a room, the conversation seemed to stop, replaced by awkward silences. Even Mrs. Johnson, who usually exuded warmth, now regarded her with a wary eye. Precious knew she should walk away. She had no business getting involved in the family's affairs. But the letters she discovered, the cryptic warnings from Kelvin, and Maurice's threats had pulled her into a web of intrigue she couldn't untangle. And deep down, she knew she had to see this through. That evening, as the family gathered in the living room for dinner, Precious served the dishes in silence. Maurice sat at the head of the table, his charm on full display as he entertained the family with stories from his time in the States. Kelvin, seated across from him, remained quiet, his gaze fixed on his plate. The air between the brothers was thick with unspoken tension. After dinner, Mr. Johnson asked to speak with Precious privately. He led her to his study, where he closed the door behind them. The room smelled of leather and aged whiskey, the dim lighting casting long shadows on the walls. "Precious," he began, his tone measured, "you've been an excellent addition to this household. But I must remind you of your place here." She stiffened, meeting his gaze. "I've done nothing to overstep, sir." He studied her for a moment before leaning back in his chair. "This family has a legacy to protect, and I won't allow anything, or anyone, to jeopardize that. I trust you understand." The words were a warning, but Precious couldn't let it slide. "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, if there's something I should know, something that could affect me while I'm working here, I think I deserve to hear it." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, she thought he might lash out. But instead, he stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "There are things in this family's past that are best left buried," he said finally. "You're a smart woman, Precious. Don't dig where you shouldn't." She left the study feeling more unsettled than ever. The warnings were piling up, but no one would tell her the full story. It was as if the entire family was guarding some dark secret, one that could tear them apart if it came to light. The next day, Kelvin found her in the garden again. He looked as though he hadn't slept, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible stress. "Precious," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to tell you something. It's about Maurice." She crossed her arms, bracing herself. "What is it?" He hesitated, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Years ago, Maurice made a deal with some very dangerous people. It was supposed to be a quick way to make money, but it backfired. My father used the family's resources to cover it up, but the people Maurice owes haven't forgotten." Her heart sank. "What kind of people?" Kelvin shook his head. "The kind who won't hesitate to destroy this family if they don't get what they want. And now, with the new year approaching, I think they're planning something." Before Precious could respond, Maurice appeared, his expression unreadable. "Kelvin," he said smoothly, "don't you have something better to do than scare our chef?"